Tonight on Newswire L.A., we wrap up our coverage of the Los Angeles mayoral election. The ballots are in, and we know who will be moving into City Hall this July. We'll also take a look at some of the other important races that were decided this past May 21st. So sit back and let us walk you through the election cycle. All of this and a Newswire L.A. story update coming up right after the credits. Hi, and welcome to Newswire L.A. I'm your host, Chin Thomasangsi, and I am here at 433 South Normandy Avenue in Los Angeles. I am standing outside of a polling place as it is Election Day here in Los Angeles. What we're going to do tonight as our continuing coverage of politics in Los Angeles is we're going to do something different. We're going to take an in-depth look at the winner and the loser in the mayor's race, and we're going to look at why the race came out exactly as it did. We'll also let you hear from the next mayor of Los Angeles. Let's start off by looking at the final stats on May 21st race for mayor. The numbers you're seeing reflect 100% of all precincts reporting. Eric Garcetti got 181,995 votes. That breaks out to 53.92% of the votes cast. Wendy J. Gruhl got 155,497 votes cast. That breaks out to 46.07%. Eric Garcetti officially wins the race for mayor. As far as Wendy Gruhl is concerned, her loss was extremely significant in the fact that Gruhl, who once thought her union backing and her money was a blessing, was dogged by the backlash those voting dealt out. We'll talk more about that after we go to a segment where Gruhl actually speaks on some union issues. In this clip, Gruhl answers a question about union busting believed to be taking place at Los Angeles International Airport. Let's listen in.
Fanny has asked the question, workers at LAX are currently fighting to retain good jobs, and thousands fight to make their jobs better. Contractors openly fight against workers and unions at LAX. What will you do to end union busting at LAX?
Thank you very much. And for the rest of you that are here, understand that these individuals who represent a union have been here and worked very, very hard to ensure that all of the employees, particularly those with this company, who have been working in the airlines and cleaning and all the others, have the same kind of health care and benefits and living wage that's required by the city of Los Angeles. I've worked very closely with the leader, Mike Garcia, as well as having conversations with the individuals at the airport and with our contract administration to ensure that all of the rules are followed and that we stand up as elected officials and say we do not condone and do not support union busting, that we do not condone taking away the rights of our individuals who are working in those companies. And so I want to thank them because many of these individuals who have been working there have risked a lot by standing up. And that's what a union does, is stand up for those that may not have a voice. So I want to thank you for being here and stand with you and working with you as we try to resolve what is happening at the airport, and count me in as someone who will stand up as a strong voice to ensure that the living wage, the health benefits are provided, and that there's a seat at the table to begin to address this so we don't have the problem here.
Ms. Gruhl, thank you. Mr. James.
Wendy Gruhl had the backing of numerous unions and political action committees, which is what makes her loss so devastating. Gruhl spent over $5 million in her bid for mayor and lost. By some accounts, she actually spent $7 million, which means she spent about $45 for each vote she won. According to an article by Jack McGrath in the Long Beach Press-Telegram, Gruhl's defeat demonstrates that the political super PACs, especially those connected with labor unions, have become toxic. In Gruhl's case, $2.8 million came in from the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, or the IBEW Local 18, which represents 8,000 employees of the City of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Getting that much money allowed her opponent, Garcetti, to portray her as the DWP mayor, and it worked. In all fairness, Garcetti had his own union backers, but the larger unions with the bigger war chest went for Gruhl. Aside from the union issue, Miss Gruhl, it appears, failed to capture female voters, Hispanic voters, and had a mismanaged campaign that actually allowed her to have no campaign commercials on the air in the critical days leading up to the election. Miss Gruhl instead relied on big-name endorsements and the likes of former President Bill Clinton, Senator Barbara Boxer, Irvin Magic Johnson, and former Mayor Richard Riordan. In the end, Eric Garcetti ran an effective campaign that allowed him to win the mayor's race easily. Let's take some time and hear the mayor-elect Eric Garcetti speak on some of the issues that carried him to victory.
First question. What steps would you take to resolve the looming city budget shortfall for fiscal year 2013 through 2017?
Three things are important. One, to live inside our means. Every household and every business has to do that. And I've shown the past 3 or 4 years that we can balance budgets by coming together with our unions, by looking at things like pension reform, our healthcare costs, and the number of workers that we have. Sometimes we need to raise new revenues, and we've shown that as a way forward as well. But to me, the most critical way, which will help somebody who's out of work in South Los Angeles and balance our budget, is jobs. We need to grow our economy. And I'm the candidate for mayor with the best track record of being able to provide jobs in one of the poorest districts in the city, the third poorest district of 15, where 2 years running, the Chamber of Commerce, when they look at each different district, has said we're #1 in job growth, #1 in new business starts. I want to guarantee that every young person in this community who wants a summer job, like in the good old days, has a summer job. Because that drops crime, which means we have to spend less on policing, which means we have more money to balance the budget, and it means they're paying taxes, which again becomes part of that virtuous cycle. I want to see small businesses help. Here, where we see empty storefronts, where we see too many places where people have to get in a car or on a bus to go out of the community and don't spend their money right here. I want to recycle South LA dollars in South LA. And lastly, I want to make this a more business-friendly city. I want to take that small business and give them the opportunity to get on their feet because they're not paying a local city business tax that chases them either out of business or over the border.
As Mayor-elect Garcetti prepares to speak on the issue of medical marijuana, it's worth mentioning that Proposition D passed with over 2/3 of the vote. In short, this proposition was one of 3 to appear on the ballot. This proposition will dial back the number of medical marijuana shops to the original 135 that opened in 2007. Those 135 will also pay higher taxes to the city based on their profits taken in. This proposition was drafted by the City of Los Angeles.
Question number 2. As of today, there are 3 competing ballot initiatives, and the Los Angeles City Council has put forth an ordinance, or asked the city attorney to put forth an ordinance to regulate marijuana dispensaries in the city of Los Angeles. The California Attorney General has indicated in a letter to the California State Legislature that she is concerned about the influence of gangs and organized crime in community marijuana dispensaries. If elected mayor, how do you balance the legitimate medical needs of some patients with the issues of crime, zoning, proliferation, licensing, and monitoring of these businesses to protect neighborhoods? Please be specific.
We need help to be able to actually go in and to make sure that these drugs are out of the hands of young people, that we have a regime. And the first 2, by the way, weren't put on by the city council. You might have misunderstood listened to the earlier statements. 2 were put on by folks out there gathering signatures. There's a third that we're putting on to try to at least say, of all of these, this would be the best way forward, to do exactly some of the things that I think all 3 of us have talked about. Keep this away from schools and churches and other sensitive uses, making sure there's a limited number that goes back to the original amount, which I think is a good number. And then also to charge a fee so that we can actually have enforcement to get the bad ones that are linked to organized crime, that are the bad actors, out of our communities, because my district has been beset by probably the most or many of these, and as soon as you take one down, it's like whack-a-mole. 2 or 3 more jump up, and we don't have the resources to go after them. Charging a fee will go there. And one last thing I'd like to add, a little different as well, is I want to make sure that we have some standards and whatever we can do for good workers to be there. In fact, we have, I know many members of the union here today. I know that the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, which my grandfather and grandmother were both members of, are trying to organize so that we can make sure we don't have more low-wage jobs. And for folks who work in the medical industry, who work in dispensaries, just as people work in pharmacies, we should have a living wage, we should have benefits, and we should make sure that they have decent working conditions as well.
Garcetti and the other candidates spoke on issues surrounding the Los Angeles Police Department. During the campaign, the Christopher Dorner case gripped the city and the nation. Most recently, the LAPD SWAT unit is under pressure for the possible selling of guns. Garcetti now has the discretion to keep Chief Charlie Beck on as his chief. We don't know where he stands on this, but we're just pointing out the fact that he now has discretion to make changes in many critical city offices.
Recently, there have been a series of incidences of alleged brutality at the hands of LAPD related to citizens in custody. Do you propose any changes in training and tactics by LAPD officers to mitigate this growing problem of citizen deaths, injuries, and lawsuit settlements? If so, specifically, what would you propose to the police commissioners you appoint and to Chief Beck?
Thank you. This is a question near and dear to my heart. As a little boy, I would be around the dinner table at night. My father was in charge of the division of the district attorney's office that went after police officers who were accused of brutality. And it was so bad back in those days, if you remember the Eula Love case and some of the other cases that ripped this community apart, is we actually had officers, when my dad would go to the division house to let them know that they'd be investigated if these things happened, who said, you know what, Mr. Garcetti, if you were dying on the street and I saw you, I would step right over you and not help you. We have come a long way since the days of LAPD when people were talking about chokeholds and what they meant to African-American men. We've come a long way since we've seen those issues of brutality. We've come a long way since Rampart. But the test of the department is not whether or not mistakes will be made, because they always will be. It's the reaction of the department when those mistakes are made. So I was very glad to see, for instance, when there was an accusation of brutality in the North San Fernando Valley, that immediately officers were suspended, investigated, and every officer had to watch that videotape the next day in the department. But this is what I'll ask for of my police chief and my commissioners when I'm next mayor. First and foremost, do you believe, and what will you do to implement constitutional policing? Second, what will you do to recruit folks from our community to be police officers? Third, what can we do to make sure that we have cameras in all of our cars like we've implemented here in South Bureau to keep accountability both directions? In fact, police officers like this, and so do civil rights activists, because a camera doesn't lie, even on the person of police officers, which some have talked about. In Washington, D.C., unlike what we see in New York, where young black men and Latinos are being stopped and frisked just for being black and Latino, in Washington, D.C., they've seen similar cuts in crime because they've asked their police officers to not wait, but to go and walk, not just the senior lead officer type officers, but all of them to go walk and talk and establish relationships in the community. That's the sort of policing that I want to see, because the best intelligence and the best reduction of crime comes when officers know everybody in the community, and I want to see that. I want to see that in my own district, in my own city. Time is up, but the last thing is in our jails specifically too. Put cameras in there. I'm proud to work with LAPD to have the first protections against sexual abuse of those who are in jails, which has been a problem too.
Thank you. Ms. Girl.
The question of job creation in Los Angeles is always great. Now, this is true in Los Angeles, on the state level, on the federal level. No politician can say he or she will, quote-unquote, create jobs. All they can do is lighten restrictions on business, and that has been the real problem in the city of Los Angeles. The recent failure of Measure A shows that the people will no longer put taxes on the books that will drive more LA businesses to states like Nevada or Arizona. We've simply had enough.
Unemployment in this section of Los Angeles is the highest since the Depression, and business opportunity is the lowest in decades. What are your plans to create job and business opportunities within your first 6 months in office, if elected mayor?
As mayor, one, I will guarantee that every young person from one of our communities, a Latino or African American community, or where there's a low-income area of this city, will be guaranteed a summer job once again. Two, I will bring job skills to our community colleges, which are, and I'll bring adult ed back to LAUSD at LACC, Los Angeles City College, where we brought a job center using city money and put that together so we have a community college, LAUSD, and city working together. Three, looking at our schools, making sure that we get children job ready, not just with a summer job, but teaching them about things like entrepreneurialism so they can start a business when they graduate and bring jobs to South Los Angeles like my grandfather did when he saved every nickel, every penny until he could open up his own barbershop right here in South LA. And then four, I will target key industries. You see, we see entire industries, and Jen Perry deserves a lot of credit. I've worked with her, Mr. Parks. Take the construction trades where African Americans weren't working there anymore. By having local hiring agreements and by working with unions, we brought thousands of African Americans back into trades where they didn't exist, and that's what I will do as mayor as well.
Thank you, Mr. Garcetti. What do you believe is the role of city government to reduce poverty and end homelessness? Good question.
Thank you for that question. This is the reason I'm in public service. This is the reason why I've decided this crazy life, and all three of these people deserve some praise for doing what I know I've been doing for the last year and a half, crisscrossing the city. Not seeing our family, not seeing our friends, because I think we believe in the city, but for me it gets to the point of, can we end poverty and can we end homelessness in the city? And I've said, I won't just manage homelessness, I will end it. Now, to understand why I can make a claim like that, and why I'm compelled to do those sorts of things, is you've seen me stand and deliver on all sorts of a progressive agenda, whether it was banks when we had foreclosures, writing the first laws in the country to keep people from being homeless, who were being illegally evicted out of their homes even though they were paying rent, out of their apartments even though they were paying rent. We were the first city to do that, and I wrote that legislation. I made sure that we looked at new ways of attacking homelessness, whether it was our veterans, our emancipating foster youth, looking at those who are families and chronically homeless, because we actually go out there and learn their names, and we put them in permanent supportive housing. I will build our housing trust fund up to $100 million or more, maybe go to the ballot to have people look at a bond that would help us get our homelessness finished like we did with Prop H that nearly passed a few years ago. And with poverty specifically, we need good jobs. I mean, we have folks here who are working, members of United Service Workers West who are here, members of SEIU, who go out to the airport every single day, who work in our buildings, who are our janitors, and they can barely make ends meet. We have to end poverty. That's why I've stood up for a living wage. That's why I've been arrested for dining hall workers at USC whose health care was going to be taken away in the tradition of Martin Luther King and civil disobedience. The difference you get with me is I'm somebody who's put my